Kia ora, Bob. Welcome to Source to Source. It's lovely to have you on the show. And I've invited you along, and I guess, dare I say it, I know as Bob, Sir Robert Harvey. You've been a man who's had, I guess, all sorts of roles in this country and been involved in numerous projects. And I guess one of the things is that I've always seen you someone really who's got an ability to reinvent yourself or to source yourself and to keep going through thick or thin. So in Source to the Source, we really like to ask people and start off like, how do you actually source yourself? What's the source of how you keep going?
Oh, well, kia ora, Andrew. And I'm very flattered that you say such nice things about my rather interesting and challenged life. I guess it's lovely to share some knowledge and a bit of wisdom of what you've learnt along the way. And I guess I've been thinking in this time of lockdown, of trial and error, has it's going to work, with its fears, the plague years. I never thought in my life I would see a pandemic. Although I'd been around as a kid when the polio epidemic was around, and I remember that very vividly. I remember all the near misses that we've had, the Ebola, of course, SARS, all those flus that seemed to drift around but never came here. And suddenly it's knocking on the door. And so it's given me a chance to think, where to next? And I guess in my life, I've had a lot of where to next. And if I look back on my life, the source of my inspiration has always been, I guess, a place. And I think that if you want to be anything or be somebody, and by the way, I also welcome people that just want to be a nobody, just someone that is happy being themselves. I give a big cheer onto that. But I wanted to be in advertising when I was young. I was inspired by, I guess, magazines that my grandparents had. They had American magazines when I was growing up, Saturday Evening Post, Life, Look, those terrific, wonderful color magazines that came out every week in America. And I just read page by page. And I thought, there's a world out there that I don't even know about. And so when I was about 13 or 14, I started to be inspired by publicity, I guess you might say. And of course it was reflected by advertising. And I dreamt of being in advertising. And by the time I was 18, I wanted so much to be in advertising. It seems a journey that was very difficult at the time for a young man. But by the time I was 21, I had started an advertising business with another wonderful individual. And together we built a business that went for 30 years and became one of the most established advertising agencies in New Zealand, working in the political realm for the Labour Party. And so I became inspired by my clients. They were the Prime Ministers of New Zealand. I started to write a few scripts for them, if you like. I kind of invented the electioneering model that New Zealand still goes along with, the cult of the personality. And I learned a lot from them. I learned a lot from the mayors of Auckland that I worked for, the famous Mayor Robbie. And I would look at these people, Kath Tizard, people that were inspiring and inspirational. And I used to think, where is their source? Where is their energy? How do they pick up on the nuances of and issues of popularity? I think it was Robbie that once told me that very famous saying that I used a lot when I became the mayor: it's wrong to be right too soon. In other words, if you find a great idea and you send it out there like a pigeon, like Noah did, if you like, to bring back something that will change, and it comes back and it's fine. But if it doesn't come back, move on. And so I learned very quickly that if you have great ideas, even about yourself, and it doesn't seem to work, then find another one. I mean, you have to always keep coming back to yourself. You have to find inspiration for where you are. And I've been talking about leadership in a landscape for the last decade. Find your own tree, your rock. You can sleep under the tree, hard to sleep under the rock, but sleep by that rock, or a beach. But find somewhere that you can go and move forward, be someone that you want to be in the course of nature. So my source, if you like, if that's the question of the day, has been a beach. Swimming in the surf, the bigger, the wilder surf, the better. The beach, one beach, not all beaches, has been my inspiration. Whenever I've been troubled, and in the years of the mayoralty, there was enormous kind of issues, I would go there. I would sleep under the stars at night, sleep in the sand dunes. Sounds a bit bizarre to people, but it worked for me. And I've been talking about finding that place that belongs only to you. It doesn't belong to a group, it belongs to you. And in that place, rediscover yourself and transform yourself to the next person. I mean, every day I think we wake up, we're a new person. Every day we have a chance to be different, to be kinder, to more adventurous, to more challenging, to more understanding. Every day offers you a chance to open a new door to a new you. And I've always felt that. And then always keep moving forward. So I've never regretted moving out of advertising. And surprisingly enough, I've never regretted leaving the mayoralty. I mean, it was easy for me to leave the mayoralty than most politicians. I never got fired. And I'm still working. I'm close to 80. And I'm still inspired by new challenges. And I still go back to the source. I still go back to the source alone and walk, swim, sleep, and think, a bit like a Chinese opera where the curtain comes down and you go, wow, that bit was terrific. So I know from a very early age how to control, if you like, those seasons of my life. An early season, when I was sleeping on the beach at Waitakere and I'm 18, I go into town, I find a job, I come back to Waitakere 30 years later. I'm not the same man. I'm married, I have 5 kids, I've got a lot of money, but I come back to the source and say, well, that was bloody good. Hey, what's next?
It's awesome, Bob. Thank you so much, because I think you probably answered all my questions almost in one. And I think you've answered them in one of the most powerful things that is a operating force energy, and that's nature, of course. Because what I'm getting at in source to source is looking at perhaps 3 sources for ourselves. You know, our source of strength, our source of ideas, our source of renewal, and our source of spirit. And it's almost like they've all come wrapped together with you in the most powerful force we have, which is nature. But I still want to ask you, because you've come up with some pretty good creative ideas in your time, where do they come from?
They come often in the middle of the night. They come from the beach, where I would ponder maybe 2 or 3 days. What is the answer to that? I mean, in the advertising days, I was up against some pretty big opposition, and I'd often go out to my source and I would take a blanket or a sleeping bag and lay in the sand dunes and look up at a trillion stars. And I guess I had a yearning to understand where people and place came from. Somehow, to me, I would come up with maybe a great slogan. I'm rated by coming up with some great lines. It's time, I think, for the Labour Party in 72, which has been one of the great lines in New Zealand advertising. Came out of sleeping, I think, at Karikari, or walking at Karikari. The Starship, I know, which is a great brand for the Children's Hospital, came from a run. But I just went, yeah. Coming up with naming New Zealand's national TV channel, a very simple one, just called TV1, came from, I remember, A Night Under the Stars, when I was thinking of exotic and, fantastic, different Americanish brands, and came up with just a simple, wow. The book that I've been writing, what would I call it? I would say it takes time for those thoughts to come around. I think that has been my kind of cauldron that I stir gently, and out of it comes an idea. It comes from me, of course. It comes from deep in what you might call a soul journey. So you bring in every idea, mystic ideas, spiritual ideas, transformational ideas, hard commercial ideas, and you look at them as they move past you.
They always say in leadership, of course, it's who you're being when the times aren't going so well, and also when nobody can see you. That where do you, in this time, I think a lot of people are going to be looking as to where can they source their resilience and reinvention when sometimes the way forward might seem incredibly rocky or even impossible to some people. So what would you say to someone in terms of sourcing their resilience, the bounce back, as I'm talking about it a bit lately to people? How do you bounce back if things don't go according to plan? I think you've already answered that in some ways, but to sort of put a focus on it for people at the moment, if they were to go, okay, how do I keep going? What do I do when it seems so uncertain?
Things are always not going to plan in your life, in the world. I mean, who would have thought that the reality is worse than the movies we've seen? And we've been seeing these kind of movies for about 50 years. We've also been reading for the last 200 years, if you read, Mary Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein, by the way, and by the way, later she invented the computer, but before she got to that, she wrote a book called The Last Man. She wrote this book about the last man on the planet in about 1790, and it's extraordinary. And also, of course, the plague years. These are not new. Jack London is writing about the last survivor. So there's been a lot of history written long before the movies in Zombieland came up about survival in troubled times. So people have been thinking about what ifs, and what ifs are always around the corner. And so this is now a lot of what ifs, and what about me? It's always got to be about where do I go now? And how do I go? And who am I? Who am I now? I mean, people are losing jobs. The work, the world that we knew of will not exist as it was. It can't be. But never waste a crisis. It's the perfect time to change, to be the person you want to be. You have to have that belief in yourself. It's got to come from you. It's got to come from the way you are. And so I think the generosity of spirit and the kindness of spirit, which New Zealanders seem to have had in spades in the last 4 weeks or 5 weeks, has been a tribute to our ingenuity. And you might say, well, we've certainly thought of a hell of a lot of things in life. And we've been lucky to live in a country that was the last country to be discovered in the world. So we're fresh, we're new, we're not stale, we're not burdened down by histories of oppression. But when I talk about leadership, I also will say to people, you can't live this life without reading, say, Marcus Aurelius. And when you start reading old books, if you like, or old stories, you realize that life was worse then than it ever was for us. Besides, everyone was dead at 40. And if you didn't make 40, well, you were probably knocked off by the plague. So these things that we're seeing now happened quite regular in old times. And isolation was no big issue. They knew how to do that. They were hiding in castles and monasteries in the 1500s and the 1600s to dodge the plague. But they weren't smart enough to be truly isolated. So they sent their servants out to buy the food, and the servants brought back the plague. We are smart enough to know isolation is the way that we have to move forward. We've got that. And so we're smarter. We're more savvy about high tech, about health, about well-being. But there's still the cunning virus. And if we think we're smart, probably we are. But the virus is also a bit like artificial intelligence, highly dangerous.
Thanks so much for all your insights, because you've got as you've said, you've got a rich inner life, and I think this is part of the key to it. Is actually, perhaps we don't always like ourselves all the time, but if we like or understand or know where to explore our inner life, then I think that's our essence, and coming to understand our essence is what you're talking about, I think. And on a lighter note, because I can't ever go past a good pun in terms of the title of this show, Source to Source, but I also think in terms of great storytelling, food is such a critical unifying factor in every culture that you can't go past having a bit of a Kai story in the midst. So I'm always asking people in these interviews, what's your favorite source when it comes to food to share?
Well, I think that I have to think, I often think about this, if I was on a desert island, it doesn't seem to be a lot of big chance. What is my favorite piece of music? What's my favorite book? And what is my favorite food? I reckon, if we're talking about sourcing a great dish, I'd like a big stack of avocados. I reckon that would do me till the ship came to rescue me.
And I do believe that's a whole food. I was once told if you had nothing but avocados and bananas, it's got every nutrient you need. So thanks so much for coming on the show today, Bob. And my plan is that these shows become useful for people in this time to have a bit of a think, a bit of a reflect. As you said, never waste a great crisis. There's so much opportunity around if people can find their way to it, to perhaps do things better than we've done in the past, do what we like to do more than we've done in the past, and go forward into a bit of a new world.
Andrew, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
You.